Emma Harlow disappeared without a trace, leaving the entire town in fear, and the masked figure who haunted the forests had been waiting silently for decades to strike again. The town beside the lake had always been known for its peaceful charm. People lived slow, predictable lives, and everyone trusted one another without hesitation. Days passed quietly, and nights were even calmer, filled only with the soft rustle of leaves and distant sounds of water brushing against the shore. Because life was so calm for so long, the residents never imagined anything strange could happen in their safe little world. That confidence became the very reason they failed to notice the earliest signs of danger slowly creeping in. It began with small, unusual events that seemed harmless at first. A farmer woke one morning to find his back door wide open, even though he remembered locking it carefully the night before. A family down the street noticed their outdoor lights flickering at odd hours, as if someone had tampered with the wires. Several people complained about hearing what sounded like footsteps outside their windows just before sunrise. Whenever someone tried to look outside, they saw nothing but darkness. No footprints, no shadows, no explanation. At first, people blamed animals, faulty wiring, or their own forgetfulness. The town had never dealt with serious crime, so the idea that someone might be sneaking around seemed impossible to them. But as the days passed, the strange occurrences grew more unsettling. Pets that were always kept inside suddenly vanished without a trace. Fences around homes were found sliced open. Fresh scratch marks appeared on the front doors of 3 different houses, all on the same night. Rumors started to tetted, yet no one had any proof of what was really happening. Parents began keeping their children indoors after sunset, and late-night walks stopped almost completely. Even the bravest residents who once strolled through the town at midnight began locking themselves inside earlier than usual. A quiet fear, the kind that nobody wanted to talk about, settled over the community. People began to sense they were being watched, even when they were alone. One evening, an elderly woman, living near the forest, claimed she saw someone standing between the trees. The figure was still, almost blending with the darkness, but she could feel its presence. By the time authorities checked the area, the figure was gone. Only broken branches and freshly disturbed soil remained. The officers told her it was probably an animal, but she insisted that the shape she saw was unmistakably human. Her neighbors whispered about it for days, though most tried to convince themselves it was just her imagination. Yet deep down, many people had already started to suspect that something was terribly wrong. Lights continued to flicker in houses that had no electrical issues. Garbage bins were found moved far from where they were left. In the quietest hours before dawn, faint tapping sounds echoed through some streets, as if someone was testing windows one by one. The true terror lay in not knowing who or what was responsible. The town had always believed it was protected by its peaceful nature, but now it felt exposed, vulnerable, and unprepared. Before long, everyone would realize that these early signs were not random accidents. They were warnings, and the danger lurking in the shadows was far more real than anyone wanted to believe. Emma Harlow was the kind of person everyone trusted without question. She had lived in the town her entire life, teaching at the local school and quietly helping neighbors whenever she could. Her days followed a routine so predictable that people often joked they could set their watches by her schedule. Each morning she left her small, neat house at exactly 7:15, waved at the same neighbors on her way to the bus stop, and returned in the evening carrying her briefcase and grocery bag. She was known for her calm demeanor, her careful attention to detail, and her unwavering kindness. That very predictability, however, would soon make her an easy target for someone who had been watching the town more closely than anyone could imagine. It was a cold, foggy morning when Emma failed to arrive at the school. Her absence was first noticed by the principal, who assumed she was ill or running late. As hours passed, her students grew restless, and colleagues began calling her house. No one answered. Concern grew quickly, turning into alarm, and the police were finally called. Officers arrived at her home, searching for signs of trouble, but everything seemed normal. Her bed was made, her keys lay on the counter, and the house appeared untouched. Nothing hinted that anything was wrong, except for her absence. The first real clue appeared when her car was found abandoned near the old railway cabin at the edge of the forest. The vehicle was parked neatly on the gravel road, with the engine off and the doors locked. Inside, Emma's belongings were left in order, her purse resting on the passenger seat, her coat folded carefully across it. Her bag containing her phone, keys, and wallet remained untouched. There were no signs of struggle, no fingerprints that could be traced, and no immediate explanation for why she had vanished. The location itself was eerie. The railway cabin had been abandoned for years, its windows cracked, paint peeling, and graffiti covering the walls. Locals avoided the place, believing it to be haunted. Now it had become the center of a mystery that gripped the entire town. Investigators followed a set of footprints leading from the car into the surrounding woods. The tracks were fresh, deep impressions in the soft earth, clearly made by a single person. At first the police thought the trail would eventually lead to Emma. They pressed deeper into the forest, calling her name, scanning the undergrowth, and marking each step on their maps. But the trail abruptly ended near a small clearing, leaving officers baffled. It was as though she had vanished into thin air, leaving only the earth disturbed in her wake. The town reacted with fear. Families began double-checking doors and windows. Teachers canceled late-night events. Parents warned children to stay away from the forest entirely. Rumors spread rapidly, some saying Emma had run away for reasons unknown, others whispering that she had been kidnapped. Each theory seemed as plausible as the next, yet none explained the complete lack of evidence or the sudden disappearance. The disappearance of Emma Harlow became a turning point for the town. What had begun as a series of strange occurrences now had a clear, terrifying focal point. A missing resident, someone everyone knew and trusted, someone who seemed to have simply vanished without a trace. It was a reality the town was unprepared for, and the fear that had lingered in the background suddenly surged to the forefront, revealing that the peaceful streets were no longer safe. As the search for Emma Harlow intensified, the investigators focused on the forest surrounding the old railway cabin, hoping it might provide answers. The trees were dense and ancient, their thick trunks creating shadows that stretched far across the moss-covered ground. Every step deeper into the forest seemed to carry an unspoken warning. Broken branches, bent shrubs, and disturbed earth hinted that someone or something had been moving through this wilderness with purpose. It was not the casual wandering of a hiker or the erratic path of an animal. It was deliberate, calculated, and unnerving. Among the trees, the search teams began to notice strange symbols carved and hung in unexpected places. Wooden stakes with crude markings protruded from the ground, tied to nearby branches with fraying ropes. Some symbols resembled geometric patterns, while others were crude, almost tribal figures. Investigators speculated that they might be intended to warn, confuse, or mark paths for someone who knew the forest intimately. Every symbol heightened the tension, creating an uneasy feeling that the forest itself had become a trap. Locals who had once thought of the area as picturesque now described it as menacing, as though the trees were watching. The team discovered small piles of items that did not belong in the forest. A child's sneaker, half buried under leaves. A notebook with torn pages. A scarf that smelled faintly of perfume. These remnants suggested someone had been living here for weeks, maybe months, and had been moving through the area without attracting attention. Every discovery was like a puzzle piece, but the pieces were jagged, mismatched, and impossible to fit together. It became clear that the forest was not simply a hiding place. It was a controlled space for someone who understood its secrets better than anyone else. Deeper in the woods, the investigators found signs that suggested habitation. Makeshift shelters built from tarps and branches, remnants of small fires that had long burned out, and scattered containers that once held food. The shelters were cleverly hidden, tucked into hollows beneath roots or behind thick clusters of bushes, practically invisible from a distance. It became evident that the person responsible had spent considerable time studying the area, creating routes that allowed movement without detection. Every turn in the forest seemed to reveal another clue of someone watching, waiting, and knowing the investigators were approaching. The forest also revealed evidence of unusual behavior. Trees were marked in sequences that could guide someone through complex paths, almost like a secret map. Footpaths twisted and intersected, intentionally misleading anyone who did not know the patterns. The ground bore faint scratches, deep gouges, and depressions suggesting more than simple walking. They seemed to hint at a ritual, a careful observation of timing and a deliberate awareness of every detail. The team realized that whoever had been living in the forest was methodical, patient and meticulous, able to operate in plain sight without ever being noticed by the town. By the end of the day, the forest had transformed from a neutral landscape into a place of fear and suspicion. Officers reported feelings of unease, claiming that every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig seemed amplified, as if the woods were alive and aware of their presence. The deeper the team ventured, the clearer it became that Emma's disappearance was connected to someone who had used the forest not just as a hiding place, but as a controlled environment. It was a place where danger could move freely, unseen and undetected, and where the ordinary rules of safety no longer applied. The forest was no longer just trees and shadows. It was a carefully constructed maze of fear, and those who entered it had no idea how close they were to what they were searching for. The railway cabin had stood abandoned for decades, a relic of a time when the tracks were bustling with trains and dwellers. Its wooden boards were warped and splintered, paint peeling from years of neglect, and windows covered in grime that barely let in sunlight. Most of the townspeople avoided the place, whispering about old rumors that it had once been the site of violent incidents and unexplained disappearances. Now, in the wake of Emma Harlow's vanishing, the cabin became the focus of the investigation. What was once overlooked as a harmless ruin suddenly held the key to a terrifying mystery. Police officers began their careful search, sweeping through the interior with flashlights that barely illuminated the corners of the dusty room. The air inside smelled of damp wood and mold, and every creak of the floorboards amplified the sense of unease. They examined the main room first, noting nothing out of place except for a small, jagged crack in the floor near the back corner. What had initially seemed like a simple structural flaw quickly revealed itself to be something far more sinister. Prying the floorboards away, the officers uncovered a trapdoor, cleverly concealed and coated with years of dust and grime. The trapdoor led to a narrow, underground tunnel that seemed almost impossibly small. The walls were lined with dirt and rough-hewn wood, evidence that someone had spent significant time carving the space by hand. Inside, the investigators found items that sent chills down their spines, old clothing that seemed to have been used repeatedly, personal belongings that belonged to missing pets, and even fragments of toys. Each piece hinted at lives disrupted, stolen, or manipulated in ways that no one in the town could comprehend. It was clear that the tunnel had not been constructed for comfort or shelter. It was a hiding place, a secret passage designed to go unnoticed. The tunnel also contained a notebook, its pages filled with strange drawings and meticulous notes. Symbols, maps, and cryptic sketches covered every sheet, suggesting a mind obsessed with observation and planning. The notes referenced the town, its streets, the forest, and patterns of movement, but frustratingly, there was no mention of Emma's current whereabouts. The notebook created more questions than answers, revealing the mind of someone who had studied the town and its people for years, yet remained entirely unseen. Every line of writing seemed to pulse with menace, as though the author had been watching the investigators even as they explored the tunnel. As the officers examined the underground space, they began to notice evidence of long-term use, footprints in the dirt, signs of recent food storage, and discarded objects carefully hidden under loose boards. The tunnel was not just a temporary refuge. It had been a controlled environment for someone who understood secrecy and stealth on an advanced level. The precision of the space and the careful placement of items indicated a person with patience, planning, and a methodical approach to hiding from the world above. The discovery of the trapdoor and tunnel changed the course of the investigation. The cabin was no longer just a site of curiosity. It had become a central piece of a puzzle that had already terrified the town. The presence of personal belongings, stolen items and cryptic notes suggested that Emma's disappearance was part of a larger pattern connected to someone who had been operating in the shadows for years. The tunnel, hidden beneath the decaying cabin, was a chilling reminder that appearances could be deceiving, and that danger could be lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to strike. Every detail in the tunnel raised new fears. The investigators realized that the person responsible had created a space that was more than just physical. It was psychological, designed to unsettle, confuse, and control. The underground chamber hinted at a mind that thrived on secrecy and manipulation, leaving the town with a haunting question. How many other victims had passed through this hidden world without anyone ever knowing? As the investigation into Emma Harlow's disappearance deepened, a retired officer came forward with information that immediately shifted the focus of the case. He had once worked on a series of missing person reports 2 decades earlier, all involving hikers, campers, and even a few townspeople who vanished without explanation near the same forest. At the time, the cases had been dismissed as accidents or individuals running away from personal problems. Now, seeing the strange wooden symbols, hidden tunnels, and calculated disappearance patterns, he realized that the old cases bore an eerie resemblance to Emma's disappearance. The retired officer spoke of a man who had once drawn suspicion but had never been caught. This man was a survivalist, highly intelligent, and remarkably elusive. He had lived off the land, using the forests and abandoned structures as his domain, and he was rumored to have an obsession with patterns and human behavior. Investigators at the time had noticed symbols carved into trees and strange arrangements of objects that seemed to indicate some form of ritual or strategy. But the evidence was dismissed as eccentricity. Before the authorities could fully question him, the man had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only cryptic notebooks and a trail of unanswered questions. Now, 20 years later, the similarities were undeniable. The wooden symbols found in the forest around the railway cabin were almost identical to those documented in the old reports. The carefully concealed tunnels, the meticulous placement of personal belongings, and the calculated nature of the disappearances matched the old case files too closely to be a coincidence. It became apparent that the same individual, or someone with a nearly identical methodology, had returned. The possibility sent shockwaves through the police force. A predator who had gone unnoticed for 2 decades was active once more, and this time, they had claimed someone deeply known and loved by the community. The town, which had prided itself on its safety and familiarity, began to feel the weight of a long-standing threat. People who had grown up with these old stories started recalling minor details that had seemed unimportant at the time: fences cut mysteriously, animals vanishing for days, and the occasional figure glimpsed at night. The retired officer's revelations added context to incidents that had once been dismissed as random, revealing a pattern of careful observation, manipulation, and control. The predator had studied the town for years, exploiting its complacency and trust to operate undetected. For the investigation, the connection to past cases became a breakthrough. The police re-examined old evidence, cross-referenced the locations of disappearances, and analyzed the previous reports with renewed urgency. The wooden symbols, once considered meaningless carvings, were now recognized as markers guiding someone who knew the area intimately. The forest and surrounding landscape were no longer neutral spaces. They were part of a carefully constructed environment designed to conceal a dangerous individual's movements. The realization that Emma's disappearance was part of a much larger, long-term plan changed the tone of the investigation. What had initially seemed like a single shocking event was now seen as part of a decades-long pattern, a reminder that evil can remain hidden in plain sight. The retired officer's testimony provided clarity, but also unearthed a chilling truth. Someone had been planning, observing, and acting for years, and the town had never been safe. The predator was still out there, and the possibility that others had already fallen victim and that more could be taken created a fear that gripped every resident. The past and present had collided, and the town was forced to confront a reality it had never anticipated. The danger had been closer than anyone had imagined, and it had been waiting patiently all along. With the forest search yielding few answers, authorities decided to expand their investigation to the swampy area behind the dense trees. The swamp was a place locals avoided, warning of deep mud, hidden water channels, and dangerous wildlife. Few dared to enter after dusk, and many insisted that eerie sounds could be heard late at night, though no one could explain them. Investigators knew that if Emma had been moved, this remote and treacherous location could easily conceal her or other victims. So teams equipped with boats, ropes, and floodlights set out to comb every inch of the swamp. The initial sweep revealed signs of human presence. Flattened reeds indicated movement through the water, and footprints in the soft, wet soil suggested that someone had carried heavy objects across the marsh. Investigators also discovered makeshift hiding spots among the roots of overhanging trees, areas where a person could crouch or rest unnoticed. The swamp's natural darkness and mist created an atmosphere that heightened tension and unease. Even seasoned officers reported feelings of being watched, as though unseen eyes followed every step they took. It was during a careful search near a particularly isolated bend in the swamp that the team uncovered a shallow grave. The ground had been freshly disturbed, and as they cleared away the soft mud, they discovered several personal items belonging to people who had gone missing over the years. Among them were wallets, a pair of eyeglasses, a scarf, and fragments of jewelry. One piece stood out, a small, partially broken bracelet belonging to Emma. Its discovery confirmed the grim truth that the swamp had been used to hide evidence of the predator's crimes. Though Emma herself was not present, the evidence suggested she had been there at some point, increasing the urgency of the search. The shallow grave, hidden among thick reeds and murky water, revealed the predator's meticulous planning. Items were ranged with an eerie precision, none of them disturbed, suggesting a deliberate placement rather than careless dumping. The discovery painted a terrifying picture. The person responsible had an intimate knowledge of the swamp, using it as a controlled environment to manipulate and hide victims. The area's complexity made it an ideal location for someone skilled at moving silently and remaining undetected. As the search continued, investigators noticed subtle signs that the swamp had been used repeatedly over time. Paths that seemed random at first revealed faint patterns. Depressions in the mud, twisted reeds, and small markers that could guide someone familiar with the area. Every clue pointed to the predator's long-term presence, confirming what the retired officer had hinted at. The individual had studied the town, the forest, and now even the swamp, creating a network of hidden locations to control their victims' movements. The discovery of the shallow grave sent shockwaves through the town. People realized that the predator had been operating with precision and patience for years, taking lives or possessions, leaving minimal evidence and striking at times when no one expected. The swamp became a symbol of fear, a reminder of how easily someone could hide in plain sight, using the natural environment as a weapon. Despite the chilling discoveries, Emma's fate remained uncertain. The bracelet indicated she had been in the swamp, but the absence of her body raised the terrifying possibility that she was still alive, perhaps being held elsewhere, moved carefully from one hidden location to another. The thought that she could still be in danger created a tense urgency, pushing investigators to search deeper, question every clue, and face the unsettling reality that the predator's plan was far from complete. The swamp had revealed only a fragment of the truth, and the investigation now had to unravel the larger network of secrecy and terror that had gripped the town for years. Weeks into the investigation, the tension in the town had reached a breaking point. Residents avoided the lake after dark, and officers maintained constant patrols along the forest and swamp edges. Despite exhaustive searches, Emma Harlow remained missing, and the shallow grave in the swamp suggested the predator had a carefully orchestrated plan. It was late one night when a patrol drone was deployed to monitor the fisherman's shack, an isolated building on the lake's far shore that had once been used by locals to store nets and tools. The structure had been abandoned for years, but its position made it an ideal hiding spot for someone who knew the area intimately. The drone's thermal camera captured movement near the shack. A tall figure emerged from the shadows, unmistakably human, wearing what appeared to be a handmade mask that covered the entire face. The figure moved with deliberate precision, carrying heavy, bulging bags toward a small boat tethered to the dock. Every step was calculated, silent on the uneven ground. The officers monitoring the feed froze, recognizing immediately that this was no ordinary trespasser. It was likely the person responsible for Emma's disappearance, someone who had mastered the art of remaining unseen for decades. When authorities arrived at the shack, they found it empty. The boat had been pushed back into the water, and the bags were gone. However, the interior of the shack revealed a treasure trove of disturbing evidence: ropes, survival gear, food supplies, and a carefully organized collection of notebooks and maps. Among the maps were markings corresponding to the locations of every disappearance connected to the predator, including Emma's last known movements. The list of dates and names made it clear that this individual had been planning and executing these crimes over an extended period, studying the town and its people with obsessive precision. Every item inside the shack told a story of meticulous preparation. The survival gear suggested the predator was ready to live off the land for weeks, if necessary, and the ropes and containers indicated an ability to transport victims or belongings without leaving a trace. It became evident that the predator had a system in place, one that relied on knowledge of the forest, swamp, and lake routes to move freely. This knowledge allowed him to vanish at will, leaving nothing for investigators to trace. The presence of the mask added another layer of terror. It was crudely made, but intimidating, suggesting a desire not only for concealment but for psychological control over anyone who might see it. The mask represented anonymity, a hidden identity that no one could uncover, and a chilling reminder that the predator had been operating outside the reach of law enforcement for decades. The realization that he could appear and disappear at will, striking wherever he chose, sent waves of fear throughout the town. Authorities now faced a predator who was not only cunning and patient, but also highly mobile and unpredictable. The shack, the boat, and the carefully maintained list of victims showed that he had been planning his moves meticulously, observing patterns in the town, and exploiting weaknesses in human behavior. It became terrifyingly clear that Emma's disappearance was not an isolated event, but part of a later ongoing operation, one that had been evolving over decades. The discovery at the fisherman's shack transformed the investigation from a search for a single missing person into a desperate hunt for a highly intelligent and calculated criminal. Every step the predator took had been calculated, every hiding spot carefully chosen, and every move designed to remain invisible. The masked figure had once again vanished, leaving only clues and unanswered questions behind. The town was left with the chilling knowledge that someone capable of such meticulous planning was still at large, moving silently through the shadows, watching, waiting, and ready to strike again. The search for Emma Harlow had reached its most critical point. After weeks of following false leads, examining shallow caves, and scouring the forest, swamp, and abandoned structures, authorities were no closer to finding her alive. The tension in the town was palpable, with every resident aware that the predator was still at large, moving with precision and intent. It was during a deep exploration of the caves along the lake's edge that investigators stumbled upon what would become the most horrifying and revealing discovery of the entire case. The caves were narrow and winding, carved over centuries by water and erosion. They were dark, damp, and unstable, with hidden pockets and chambers that could easily conceal a person for days or even weeks. Flashlights and portable floodlights revealed walls streaked with mineral deposits, and the sound of dripping water echoed ominously throughout the passages. The investigators moved carefully, aware that the terrain itself could be as dangerous as the person they were pursuing. At the end of a particularly tight passage, they discovered a final chamber illuminated by a single, flickering lantern. In the center of the room, crouched against the far wall, was Emma. She was weak, dehydrated, and frightened, but alive. The sight brought a mixture of relief and horror to the officers. Surrounding her were remnants of the predator's meticulous planning: ropes, containers, blankets, and notes detailing the movements of previous victims. The chamber revealed the chilling reality of the predator's mind. This was not a random act of violence, but a carefully orchestrated, long-term plan executed with precision and patience. Emma's written notes explained the terrifying methods of her captor. The predator had been observing the town for decades, selecting victims based on predictable routines and behaviors. He had studied their daily patterns, understanding when each person would be most vulnerable. Using hidden tunnels, concealed paths in the forest, and secret routes through the swamp and lake, he moved freely without being detected. Emma described how he had monitored her every step, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, and how he had manipulated the environment to control both her and previous victims. The chamber itself spoke volumes. Objects were placed deliberately to create a sense of confinement and psychological control. The lantern patterned just enough light to navigate but not enough to reveal the exits, reinforcing a feeling of helplessness. The predator's knowledge of the area was apparent in the way the caves connected to unseen passages leading to the lake and forest, allowing him to move quickly and silently. Emma's survival depended on her ability to remain unnoticed and patient, waiting for an opportunity to leave a trail that investigators could follow. Despite the relief of finding Emma alive, the investigation's final revelation was chilling. When authorities attempted to trace the predator, he had already escaped through a flooded passage connecting to another part of the cave system. His disappearance reinforced the terrifying reality that he was still at large, capable of exploiting every weakness in the town's geography and human behavior. The case concluded with a mixture of triumph and fear. Emma was rescued, but the predator's identity remained unknown, and the extent of his crimes suggested he could strike again. The town, forever changed, learned that appearances could be deceiving and that danger could linger unnoticed for decades. The predator's patience, intelligence, and meticulous planning left a lasting impression. Evil could hide in plain sight, waiting silently, always observing, and ready to exploit the predictable patterns of human life. The horror of the case was no longer confined to Emma's ordeal. It became a lesson in vigilance, fear, and the fragility of safety.